Hello, and welcome back to An Unusual Kind, That 1%, One Life, Five Generations, based on actual experiences and theories. This story includes entertaining fictional and non fictional images, animation, videos, and music, sometimes music, by artists and photographers unrelated and in no way were created for this particular story or documentary. Some names, dates, and times were changed to protect the privacy and identities of the characters within the story. Again, this is still volume one. Okay, so let's get through our disclaimer. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit educational or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. This source is from Circular 92, Copyright Law of the United States, 17 USC, Section 107. All right, so this story here is Chapter 18, beginning with Schoolwork is Boring. All right, so let's start right into it. During E's first and second years of elementary school, E showed signs of having little to no interest in schoolwork. E just enjoyed playing and being in her own little make believe world. E was also very active when it came to playing. She rarely would take a break. If she could, E would go on all day long playing, sometimes not even wanting to stop to just have lunch or dinner. One day, obviously going back in time a little here, people, E's first grade teacher reported to E's mother that E wouldn't really do any of her classwork or leave it incomplete and felt E may need to be state tested to see if she might need to be transferred to a less challenging class or less challenging classes. E's mother was absolutely stunned when she received a letter from E's teacher claiming such and requested that E's mother call and speak with the teacher about E's progress and possible state testing. After reading the letter received in the mail from E's teacher, E's mother immediately called E from her bedroom, where she was playing with her baby dolls, to come to the living room so she and E could talk about the teacher's letter she had just received in the mail. The first thing E's mother asked E was why she wasn't doing her classwork or not finishing her classwork. E figured she was in trouble, held her head in a somewhat downward position while lifting her eyes upward to look at her mother with sad puppy dog eyes, and said, because the work is no fun and that it's the same work over and over, which makes her feel bored in class. E's mother began explaining to E the object of why the teacher may repetitively give the same kind of practice work during class for different lessons and the importance of doing and finishing the classwork. E's mother tried to explain the importance of these facts as best she could for a 6.5-year-old to best possibly understand. No matter how much E's mother broke down the explanation of the importance of doing and completing her classwork, despite it seeming to look like the same work or math problems over and over, E's mother further explained and said the teachers do that to make sure all students understand what they are trying to teach and show them, and that each new lesson is well understood. She explained to E that it would also help her be better prepared for the tests they would have on the classwork and score high on those tests. However, E still rejected the idea of having to do the same similar work repeatedly in class by stating the example of, why should I have to keep doing the same sort of math problems over if I've already did 5 of them correctly? Then why do I have to do the other 5 math problems on that same paper if they are almost all the same, but just using different numbers to add and subtract? Isn't doing the first 5 out of 10 math problems correctly shows proof that I can do the math and I understand what the teacher is teaching? That's why the other 5 math problems are boring, because they're like the first 5 math problems. Well, now, after listening and understanding E's point, E's mother advised her if she doesn't do or finish the classwork, the school will not pass her to the next grade with all her other friends, or the school will put her in a special class with kids who have learning disabilities and aren't as smart, and she won't be with her friends in that class either. E's mother then asked E, would you want that? With her chin down in her chest, E reluctantly and sadly said in a low-toned voice, no. The next morning, E's mother called the school and spoke with E's teacher to let her know she had spoken with E about her classwork and that E was has no problem comprehending what it is being said or taught to her, but E just didn't think it was right for her to have to do the same kind of work over every day, because she felt doing the same first few is an example that she can do the work. However, E's mother added, if E still doesn't do or finish her classwork in school, then send it home and she'll make sure she completes the work. But for now, the teacher shouldn't have no further problems from E. A couple of weeks had passed since E's mother spoke with both E and her teacher, but E's mother received another notice in the mail about E's ability to do the work, and now the school has mandated that E must be state tested for special ed classes, which is special education classes or special needs classes. E's mother was furious with E because she knew E could do the work, but she wouldn't display or show the school that she could do the work, and as a result, E was failing in her class. E was put on punishment of not being able to go outside and play with her friends at home, and she was not allowed to watch TV till bedtime anymore with her older siblings until her grades began improving. E was fine with the punishment because she didn't mind playing alone and being by herself anyway. A week after, E's mother received another letter in the mail from the school showing the state test date had been set for E to take that following week. Moving forward, the state test date had finally arrived, and E had to be in the school gym at 8:15 a.m. sharp. Unknown to E, E's mother had taken the day off from work and also arrived to the school at 8 a.m., where she would be seated in a small office with a window in the back of the gym where she could hear, see, and observe E taking her state test, but E wouldn't be able to see her nor hear her if she was to move around in her office or something. E's mother observed the gym and how it was set up, with one desk sitting in the middle of the gym with two elongated tables sitting on the sides of the gym, which could seat a total of about 5 to 6 adults. There was a folded paper on the desk and a blank piece of paper along with a well-sharpened number 2 pencil on it and about 3 other well-sharpened number 2 pencils in a small tin cup on one of the elongated tables where the state testers and E's teacher would be seated. E's mother also noticed the gym lights were all well lit, and the sun was shining brightly through the high wall closed ceiling windows that trimmed the top of the gym walls, which were on the same side as the elongated tables. At 8:10 a.m., E's mother saw 2 women and a man all dressed in suits with business shoes, holding clipboards and writing pens. They then pulled out a timer with a bell and put them on one of the elongated tables, and they each took a seat at the elongated table, sat up straight with their arms resting on top of the tables as they waited for E's teacher to bring her to the gym at 8:15 a.m. to begin her testing. Right at 8:15 a.m., E and her teacher quietly entered the gym. E's teacher caringly guided E to the desk in the middle of the gym for E to take a seat and wait for further instructions from the people sitting at the elongated tables. E's teacher then quietly went over and also sat at the elongated tables with the other people who were administering the state tests. As E sat quietly waiting, looking around the gym and at her teacher and the others at the elongated tables who were all quietly talking to one another and shifting papers around, E began patiently swinging her legs back and forth in her chair as if she was sitting in a swing. E showed no emotions and looked quite content and confident. At 8:20 a.m., a lady with a gray suit on and black 1.5-inch heeled shoes stood up and introduced herself to E. Asked E if she had any breakfast that morning, which E responded by saying yes. The lady then told E it was good E had breakfast because it wasn't good to be working on an empty stomach. E smiled and continued kicking her legs, awaiting the lady's instructions. The lady then told E to first write her name and date at the top of the paper, and then she would let her know when to begin and end the test by ringing the bell. She also explained to E the blank paper was for her to use as scrap paper if she needed it, and if E felt she needed more scrap paper, for her to quietly raise her hand and they would momentarily stop the timer to bring E more paper and then start the timer again from where it stopped. After E wrote her name and date on a test paper, the lady then asked E if she was ready to begin, and E replied yes. The lady said okay. She further advised E to remember to listen for the bell and said she would walk back over to the table and ring the bell. The lady added, when you hear me ring the bell, you may begin taking your test, and if you have any questions, to be certain to raise your hand for help. Also, when you hear the bell again, it will mean for you to stop taking the test and immediately put your pencil down on the desk. With a friendly smile on her face, the lady then asked E if she understood the instructions. E smiled back at the lady and said yes. As the lady was walking back to the table, E's teacher looked at E, smiled, and gave E two thumbs up, and E smiled back at her teacher and did the same gesture. At exactly 8:30 a.m., the lady looked at E, nodded at her, and immediately tapped the bell once for E to begin her test. E immediately began taking her test. The gym remained extremely quiet while E was taking her test. E was really into taking her test while remembering everything her mom and her, teacher had told her about finishing the work and what her teacher coached her on, which was similar to what her mother was saying just before she had walked E down to the gym to take the test. The folded paper on the desk E sat at, or shall I say, had math problems on the front page, English questions on the back of the page, reading and comprehension on the front of the second page, and basic science questions on the back of the second page. As E continued working hard on her test, the second hour into her test, E heard the bell ring, which meant for E to stop taking her test and put her pencil on the desk, which E did. The lady walked over and asked E how she think she did on the test, and E answered, "Good." The lady said, "That's good," and then took the test and told E to now go with her teacher back to class. Before E's teacher walked over to meet E in the middle of the gym so they could leave, the teacher took a moment to quickly look over and skim through some of E's answers before the state testers took the test with them. After a quick skim of E's test, E's teacher expressed how proud she was of E and gave her a great big hug. She then surprised E and took her to the school lunchroom. E sat down at one of the lunch tables looking around because it was too early for lunch and no kids were in the lunchroom, and she wasn't sure what was going on or what was going to happen next. The teacher asked E to remain seated until she returned. After about 5 minutes of waiting for the teacher to return, E noticed the teacher coming back through the cafeteria doors, and to E's surprise, directly behind the teacher was E's mother. E was so excited and happy to see her mother at her school that she jumped up from her seat and ran over to her mother with open arms and a big happy smile on her face. E's mother braced herself for the impact of E's hug and open arms, as well as to return such a big hug and excitement. After the surprise reunion, E was allowed to leave school early with her mother, who had taken her to her favorite place to eat. E's mother decided, after speaking with E's teacher about the state testing, she would take E out for brunch to E's favorite place to eat, which was a fast food place called Jack in the Box. E quickly said bye to her teacher and all the other kids who were still in class after returning to her classroom to get her personal belongings so she could leave for early dismissal with her mother. Of course, when the other kids saw E was getting an early dismissal by her mom, they all began groaning because they wanted to leave and go home for early dismissal, too. E ran really fast down the school hallways to get to her mom, who was at the school's main office signing E out for early dismissal and waiting for E. E's two ponytails and colorful plastic barrettes and hair ribbons were dancing in the wind as she ran down the school's hallway holding her book bag. Later, E was really overjoyed and excited when she saw her mother turn their car into the parking lot of Jack in the Box. E already knew what to order. E ordered 2 Jack in the Box breakfast egg sandwiches with Canadian bacon and melted cheese on a toasted plain English muffin and a medium drink of orange high C. After E's mother ordered and received their food, they found a nice spot within the restaurant to sit down and enjoy their brunch. E felt it was the best school morning ever. After time went on and E began bringing her grades up, about 2 weeks after the state testing, E's mother received a letter in the mail from the State Department of Education. She opened the letter, which a copy was also sent to E's school and her teacher. The letter read, E passed the test with a score of 110%. The extra 10% was because E also did the bonus challenge question, which no one had expected E to even do. Basically, E aced that state test, whereas the school didn't think it was academically, or E was academically inclined enough to pass the state test the way she did. The state test scores showed E was actually slightly above average in learning. E's mother and siblings were so proud and happy for E. E's mother called their family in Philly to share the news about E. E's Uncle Cooley said, I told you there was nothing wrong with that child. I told you that girl was smart. The uncle continued by saying, I knew she was smart when she took my broken transistor radio that I couldn't get to work anymore no matter what all I tried to do. And E took that thing completely apart, piece by piece, and put it back together and made that radio work, which is still working to this very day. E's uncle suggested that E's mother get E some kind of games or something that would challenge her, because E seems to like to figure out puzzles and complex problems. E's mother took the uncle's advice and went to a nearby toy store and bought E an electronic gadget game called 75 Electronic Sounds in One. When E opened the box in excitement, within moments, E knew what to do and how to play the game. The game came with all sorts of different color electrical wires, little skinny ones, and all of them were different heights. The object of the game was to connect the wires anywhere on the battery-operated board in order to create different electrical sounds such as doorbells, car horns, alarm clocks, and etc. The sounds E could create were endless. E played that game from sun up to sundown and never got bored with the game. When E returned to school the Monday following that Friday, E's mother received the state test scores in the mail. E's mother was so proud of her accomplishment that she gave, or shall I say E's teacher, of course the mom was, but the teacher was so proud of her, she gave her, or shall we say, she gave the whole class a party in E's honor. She surprised E and her entire class and gave them peanut butter cookies, chocolate chip cookies, and oatmeal cookies with potato chips and pretzels on napkins, along with kid-sized cartons of milk and apple juice after they all returned to class from lunch. It was the best Monday afternoon in school E ever had. E's teacher then followed up with presenting E with a blue ribbon to put on the front of her desk for everyone to see that read, "I did it." After a week, E's teacher told E to take her blue ribbon home to show her family and hang it on her bedroom wall somewhere as a reminder of how smart she truly was or is. And E did just what her teacher told her. That blue ribbon and small classroom celebration made many of E's classmates work even harder so they could receive a blue ribbon and be celebrated too. Afterwards, the school thought about E's way of thinking about schoolwork and came up with a new learning program or with new learning programs that the next year, the next school year, geared towards kids like E who felt if they have already shown they can do something and understand the work, allow those children to keep on moving towards the next lessons so they don't become bored, disinterested, discouraged, and disengaged in their academic studies like E had begun to do prior to the state testing. The school began feeling like E. Why hold back students from moving on or forward who were a little more advanced than others by making them wait for other students to catch up? Further, E's accomplishment was the talk of her family for months. And E had a very big family. E passing that state test really shocked many of her other family members and school staff because they really thought E had some sort of a learning disability when actually it was quite the opposite. E just believed in keeping things simple, fair, and rarely overthought problems that others found complicated. Let's put it this way. Was E possibly a hidden, talented young genius in the works, or just a misunderstood child? You see, again, we have to remember what the story is about. An unusual kind, that 1%. Now, what made this story unusual is that they all condemned her to being a special need or special eds, academically, inclined student. But she wasn't a special ed or a special needs academically inclined student. She was above average inclined. But she had her own way of thinking. And she aced that test with 110%. That means even if she didn't do that other challenge question, she still would have got 100% on something that she already, knew, and they didn't think she knew how to do it. And even the uncle always said it. I don't know if you remember back in a few chapters back, the uncle has said it before, that he thought E was different. There was something different about her. And E was beginning to, how can I say, display some things and some talents and abilities that her mom and them had better start taking notice of or taking heed to, because we don't know. Sometimes those abilities or talents, they can go a good way or they can go a bad way. So you have to make sure that those type of abilities are properly nourished as soon as they're caught, but you have to be able to recognize and catch them. And sometimes it takes other family members to tell you because they're on the outside looking in. And sometimes they can see more than you, the parent, who was already on the inside looking in. So sometimes it's hard to see within your own family what's going on. But sometimes it takes a person from the outside, a non-biased person, to tell you, hey, look, I think you better pay attention to that young lady, that little girl. She's showing some signs of something else going on. And she may not be as average as y'all think she is. And you might have to, take heed to that. But in all fairness, E was quite all right with it all. And again, remember, this was back in the 70s. So we're talking about like maybe the early 70s here, when all of this was going on. So it wasn't where, you're talking about all of this science study they got going on now. These were things that people noticed, in you without having to have all of this type of research being done. Adults and parents who really cared about their children, or even other family members who really cared, they could see something gleaming out of you before you could, or before your parents really could. And in a lot of cases, the parents saw them too, but there was also the cases where other family members saw it first. Because sometimes the parents will be working so much, they would miss it. Totally miss it. But anyway, E was happy, and it caused for a great celebration. And at this point, E was no longer bored with school ever since that point. So I believe E left a mark and made a mark on the schools that to this very day, in the 2000s, those programs are still there. Those type of programs there are even more enhanced now. So you'd be surprised what these 1%ers do and the marks that they leave on the schools and how they're brought through such challenging times only to help and benefit others as well as themselves. That sounds very spiritual if you ask me. But again, they, E and them felt that this was a time for celebration and partying, and she and her family and friends did just that. And this will bring us to the end of chapter 15. Schoolwork is boring. And I want to apologize. I meant it's the end of chapter 18. My apologies, people. Please, I hope you have found this story to be just as enlightening as the last chapters. And I thank you again for tuning in. And we will try to get another chapter out there for you. As you see, they're becoming more and more detailed. Enjoy the rest of your day and evening.